there's only a panel besides the door that lights up my little cube. It dips the little room into a relaxing hyper-Yves blue. Only the outlines of my bed and some of the collected belongings on the desk and on my walls are visible. We really do live in special time. I mean, it's hard to imagine how things were previously back in the days before hyper-Yves blue. Home lighting color standards were then kind of everything. People had to see all the colors at the same time. It must have been so exhausting on the eyes. Now I feel like everything is just so comfortably drowned out in this blur of blue. I glance to the left. I see something that I didn't really want to remember. In the darkness on the desk by my bed lie the fragments that used to make up my beloved vintage hologram Rose. Earlier that day, I'd accidentally dropped it from the ledge that it had been standing on since the day that I moved in, and it's sad to see it lying there. The different petals of the rose were broken from its stem, and it's just flickering there in the bluely lit darkness. The 3D hologram rose had been in my family's possession for a century of cycles. It's the most special digital possession we've ever owned. When I was young, actually, I think it was one of the objects that actually made me a media archaeologist. But now, when it's lying there in front of me, with its broken petals, it seems to kind of reveal something. I've seen it earlier as well. These black and white patterns. They're reminiscent of the old days of compression. It triggers a sense of nostalgia in me. It makes me think of something that I've read a long time ago about the days of digital synthesis, the days before or early digital synthesis, in which they really did use compression still. Today, data is actually no longer compressed. Everything is just right there. It's rendered on the spot or generated on the spot on the user's side from the pool of everything possible or imaginable. But back in those days, the days of my hologram Rose, media were still limited. Not all images had been rendered yet. I mean, not all images could be rendered or created or displayed, which is kind of exciting to think about. Things were just a little harder then. It reminds me of this beautiful story. It's in this old reader, a reader about impossible images. I think I have it here somewhere. Yeah, it's from an exhibition actually. Let me pick it up. Here it is. Okay. There's a piece in this reader. It's by Fabian Heller. In this story, he describes screens that still use pixels, and he kind of calculates the total number of all possible images that can be displayed on screens that use pixels. So, the screen has a kind of specific type of canvas for images. It's in this work, all possible images, true color, full HD, Fabian Heller has attempted to calculate all possible images that can be shown on a standard display and he actualized them into one number. Once the specifications of the hardware on which a digital image is displayed are known, the number of all images that could possibly be rendered can be calculated. So for example, a display with the standard resolution of 1920 by 1080 Full HD, that's funny actually, that's very small. And the 24-bit RGB color space, okay, a color space, they call that true color, is composed of 2,073,600 pixels, each of which can take one of the 16 million colors. By exponentiating these two numbers, all images that can be shown on that one display can be calculated. It's a number of 14,970,606 digit long. Okay, I don't know how to say that number. That looks like a big number. If you would write that out, I don't know what that would look like. Okay. So it looks like the number of all possible images on this kind of traditional, old school, ancient display is, if you would write it out, you could not even write it out on one screen. It's bigger than I could imagine. It's like a magic number that contains kind of its own library of Babel, like every image ever possibly rendered. So that would mean images of the future, all images of the past, but also all images of a past and a future that would never exist. Like maybe all images that are actually unrenderable. Although that seems like a paradox, I don't know. Like anyway, you know, we're living now in a time that images never even finish rendering. They keep being generated and synthesized. So I don't know how this would translate to today. I don't know. I think it just kind of opens up this whole trove of imagination we kind of did away with since generative rendering at the user's end. Like when the generative pre-trained transforms, like the GPTs, became of unlimited resolution, the great age of technological solutionism may also have become kind of the great age of compromise. I think this must be what it means to speak about that day that the angel of history learned to look forward into her future, like to see her own demise. So she literally learned after a century of looking backwards into the past. She learned to look forward through the GPTs, and she saw her own demise into the future. Anyway, I don't know. Like, as a media archaeologist, I kind of have to study these things. And I also have to understand that resolutions are not just the ways to make things work. They also always kind of compromise other ways of working, like other ways of rendering or displaying. Let's take a look back at this hologram rose. The black and white patterns, they don't seem very clear, but at the same time, like, I did visit the decalibration target earlier today, and I'm pretty sure that what I can now see are DCT patterns, discrete cosine patterns. Let me take the flyer that I picked up at the decalibration target earlier today. Let me see. It's great that the IRD, the Institutions for Resolution Disputes, actually built this monument for compression and other types of resolutions, because now we don't have compressions anymore. It's good that there's some kind of like archive for that. It's kind of like the oldest digital monument, or one of those old digital monuments. So let me read. The decalibration target functions as a repository for obsolete compressions based on discrete cosine transforms, which are the transforms that were superseded by the GPTs. So they involve JPEG, MPEG, H.264, etc. They used to be the governing image compressions before the Great Wall of the Future was breached. So the great wall of synthetic reality in which, the past was rendered and the future is generated. Let me see. The IRD are not a traditional institute. Instead, they multiplex the term institution. They revisit its usage from the late 1970s. Wow. Like, that is a very long time ago. I mean, a main result of these non-logical institutions of the IRD is that different logical systems can be glued together in substrata levels, forming illogical frameworks through which computation can take place. They build bridges between logic and non-logic. Okay. So inspired by the idea of a hyperfunctional yet illogical framework, the IRD are dedicated to researching the interest of anti-utopic, obsolete, lost or unseen, or simply too good to be implemented resolutions. Okay, that's interesting. Hopefully, with this flyer, I can maybe find a way to recalibrate my broken hologram rose. So here it explains the JPEG compression. I think that's what's broken here, because this looks like JPEG compression breaking. Step 1, the color space transform. Step 2, the JPEG algorithm dissolves in downsampling. Step 3, block splitting. Step 4, discrete cosine transforms. Every yellow, blue, and green macro block is compared to all 64 base functions. Step 5, quantization. Step 6, entropy coding. Okay, so if I look, what must be wrong here? It must be the discrete cosine transforms are not aligning, so it must be step 4. What I see here is interesting. Like, DCT is also used as a font that kind of takes the shape of glyphs. So it's like a simple font that exists on the edge of the reader's recognizable space, and that of compression. You can kind of like write secret messages on top of the JPEG by using its like artifacts. It's like an emerging glyph set that can be used for steganography. It shows that composite objects, so the objects that we used to use, they can actually break and reveal unknown unknowns, or at least the things that one normally doesn't see. Maybe if I look at these objects, maybe I can actually fix the rose? Rose doesn't want to get fixed. I'll just go closer to it. When I look at it, it kind of still seems to want to show the whole image of the rose, but the shredded sides of its cuts seem to have formed like kind of new delta axes that show invisible layers, and they kind of expose the random elements of the rose. Like a kind of a variety of different types of instances of the rose. Like passes, discorrelated instances, and metadata, kind of everything that needs to be used to properly render this hologram. It seems like the threads of this rose now have become kind of its own portals to moments of a past that I never was part of, like threads that show artifacts from times when artistic entrepreneurs claimed their work through blockchain hashes, or when the great future had been initiated by an epoch of decentralization. first, this was like when the GPTs and machine learning kind of like took intelligence over, and that happened like first in the realms of economy and then of art, and finally politics, law, and then knowledge itself. Which is kind of like where the brink of the great new future happened. Wow. These fragments actually seem to have been acquired via an ERC 721 protocol. That's like one of the first proofs of provenance from before the breach of the open sea. Here's actually another thread that captures my attention. It looks like the origins of the hologram rose must have been imported via a client called Meta. These threads feel iconic. Like they reveal parts of a rose of different layers of this rose, like different elements, an ID layer. I see a probing opacity pass, a bump map layer, a nested controlled access layer, but I can also see the doi of the rose, which was like part of the great Z library. That's like from the time that libraries were still on the internet. It's exciting to see that actually. I recognize a part of a petal that comes from the rose's smell. It's like primed by Amazon, the great distributor. What else is there? Like verified, cloned CRISPR data? CRISPR data, that cannot be right. The breach of the open sea was the direct result of the inscription of CRISPR data inside the final NFT. Like, when I lay out all these pieces in front of me like a puzzle, it kind of looks like when they sit all together, when they are merging, the hologram rose kind of lights up in some kind of like cluster of cacophony of weird resolutions. But then, on top of all of that, it says, this render may populate fungible strains. This render may populate fungible strain. This is not, I didn't know. This is dangerous. Dangerous, Rose. I remember reading about the times of right-click save. It kind of like later became right-click transcode, and NFT holders kind of huddled and saved, and several image compression were falling into obsolescence, and people started to kind of like preciously pin their images on like the internet databases. They started to like chant, I right-click save to save my digital heritage, which was like a slogan of their memes at the time. So this hologram rose technology is from before the breach of the open sea and of the fall of the Great Wall of the Future. So before the fall of the Great Wall of the Future. That is actually the era that the gems on the internet were the shadow libraries and serendipity was still normal. When transforms only transformed data but didn't just generate it. Since the adoption of recurrent neural networks, slowly certain neural pathways are blocked and the potential for incidents is kind of like no longer there. The future is just always regurgitating itself. It makes me kind of like worried and annoyed somehow. I miss serendipity. In a world that has been mapped and collected in its entirety, every book kind of has been indexed and scanned into OCR. Every image has been rendered and all possible horizons have been pointed at. Nothing is impossible anymore. Everything ever possible just sits at the pool of transforms. But when everything is possible, and it's just sitting there and answered, freedom is kind of in everything. Everything just always makes sense. It's like no questions anymore. We always find what we're looking for, and everything is just at the tips of my finger. It's working. Whatever I can think of, it's always just right there. It's still... It just feels wrong. It's like we slip past an event horizon into a functional information market. And now we have arrived. The future is here. But it feels like we're just continuously floating aimlessly into an ocean of everything, like walled by the past. Everything is just full of options, but I never have to choose. Somehow it makes me want to turn off this Yves Klein blue filter. I don't know. I want to get it out. I need to not be this boring human. Wow. I don't know if this was like an act of rebellion or an experiment, but suddenly I have to cope with this ridiculous feeling like I just ripped off this monochromatic filter and I see colors. Totally forgotten about natural colors. They're bouncing like a layer on top of everything, like they give a depth and an intensity to the stuff around me, like no wonder they installed these filters. It's like overwhelming to look at all these colors, these natural colors within what used to be synthesized objects. I can kind of see the appeal. It's almost like when you eat a taste enhancer and you're experiencing that kind of same tingling, but now I'm having it with my eyes. Actually, not just with my eyes. It feels like it's also kind of reflecting and bouncing off my arms. Like, I haven't actually seen the world for what it was, for what it is, in a very long time. It makes me feel a little scared. Are my eyes going to be okay? Like, what am I gonna see next? It's funny because somehow I'm surprised by this experience, but I am a media archaeologist. Like, by profession, I think that if anyone, I'm the type of people who would actually still be trained to see natural colors. But this experience just pays testament to how cycle upon cycle the world just gets more mediated. And as it gets more mediated, everything just kind of like gets lost. Details and qualities. Unknowingly, we're just compromising entire experiences. What? It's like rainbows? They're not really rainbows. They're more like shaped like plotches, but okay. Still, they're like nature's original glitch. Like an unexpected fracture of the transmission of white light into the ROIC BP bandwidth. So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Actually, before the International Commission on Illumination finally won the color wars and they institutionalized synthesized lab colors, there was actually not just 6 bands of colors, there was also indigo and violet. Like refracted light shows itself as a continuous spectrum of light, which means that it doesn't just have these colors, but there are an infinite number of colors all between these hues of color that humans kind of never even bothered to name. It's partially because of the constraints of human physiology that we don't see the in-between colors. Human eyes just have 3 types of color-sensitive cones that filter and blend different wavelengths. But if you'd have more cones, you would see more colors between these colors. It's like since the installation of synthesized color, my rainbow and the colors that delineated or arranged it, yeah, there it is, a rainbow emoji. It's kind of like the metaphor, like the rainbow emoji with its 6 bands of color. This is the rainbow that confirms the importance of my job as a media archaeologist. Like, I teach the provenance and understanding of transmission, or the ways we understand reading and looking at the world, which is kind of shaped by these cultural artifacts. So that rainbow emoji that was introduced in Unicode 6.0 as U+1F309 has a fascinating story connected to it. It's the color war story. So they played out the color wars during the early cycles. They didn't really happen like with people getting into arms, but they happened through people getting into filters. It was the time that artists, scientists, and politicians were passionately debating the fabric of visual reality. And as a result, a divide between those who embraced the synthesized hues and those who defended the depth of natural colors, who feared kind of the connection, the loss of connection to the organic world, you know, they kind of had an argument. And that's also when they lost the Tural Gardens. Like, the Tural Gardens were a space where people still used to train and look at colors. They would congregate and like talk about their perception of light, blended or contextualized, and even just natural light. But those gardens kind of are no longer in use. I don't even know if there are any of those gardens left. The gardens once, I think they got like tagged by one of those artificial intelligence cleanup services. They got tagged as chromatic aberrations, and then, you know, they became visual noise and light pollution. And then within the night, a devastating chain reaction happened, and they just got dismantled. And since then, the archives of color just display corrupted files. When I look at this rainbow emoji, I kind of feel it's like Janus-faced. The bands of the color do not just represent the fracturing of white light into a gradient of countless and unnamed colors, but it also kind of shows the halting, the stopping of an invisible wall that doesn't allow us to go to the past. Here we just stare at a truncated synthetic world. It's kind of like about the thinning of the realms of all possible images. It makes me want to have a beer. No? You don't want to have a beer? Like what?